Hey, brothers and sisters, welcome back to another episode of Jesus Christ and the Second Coming. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm so grateful that you've come back. This is a follow-up episode to the last one where I was talking about and responding to a comment made previously about no evidences for the Book of Mormon. And so in that last episode, I talked about how I'd be more than happy to, take some time, look at those claims, and see what information I could find in response to those claims. In the last episode, one of the things that I talked about was asking the question, why does archaeological evidence even need to exist for for one to have a testimony or a belief in the Book of Mormon? And I still hold true to that sentiment. In fact, this past week I was at the temple working with a fellow brother who I've served with now for about 2 years, and I was telling him about the episode and the feedback that I got. And he brought up a very interesting point here, is that a testimony in the Book of Mormon is a spiritual testimony. It's not a physical testimony, meaning you need to have a testimony both based off of a spiritual testimony like one claims to have or one does have of the teachings in the Bible, right? It's off of the premise of what is being taught about drawing you closer to Christ. The Book of Mormon has more references to Christ than the Bible does, especially when you look at the New Testament specifically, okay? There's a lot in there. And I know that some may not agree with that sentiment. And if that's something you'd like me to review and discuss further, I'd be more than happy to. But it's important to understand that spiritually speaking, the Book of Mormon, what part of what makes it so important and what makes it a valuable resource to have in addition to the Bible, not in replace of, but in addition to the Bible, is it is another testament of Jesus Christ, and it does nothing but encourage people to come closer to Christ and to get to know Christ. And I love the sentiment that this brother shared with me, is that a testimony of the Book of Mormon is a spiritual testimony, not a physical testimony. If that was the case, then the book would be written very differently to point to and reference and have stronger physical evidences of its legitimacy and its validity. But with that said, we're still going to take a look at archaeological evidences as we can find. I don't want to preclude or try and ignore or downplay any sort of claims that were made previously about the lack of evidence. Now, there were many different points, if you will, that were made in the original comment about how the Book of Mormon references different things that supposedly we
Supposedly.
don't have archaeological evidences of today that support or align with those. Now, the first thing that I want to point out is the fact that, the comment is making that there are claims for things which don't exist or we don't have record of, okay? There's actually a term for that, and it's called an anachronism. Now, if you've never heard this term before, it was kind of a new word to me. I've only really started hearing this term anachronism within the last, I'd say probably year, maybe year and a half. And so in my research, trying to find, helpful information, I came across a good resource. And I'm going to share this here. This is an article. You'll notice that the URL is off of BYU's website. And this talks about this 11-page document talks about or addresses anachronisms, generally speaking, within the Book of Mormon. And I say generally speaking because given the fact that it's only 11 pages, if this was really addressing everything, this would be much larger than 11 pages, okay? But I want to share some of the good insider information that this document provides. And again, because it's a PDF online, I can link to it in the video description. I encourage you to come and read it yourself. Do your own research. And I want to also insert that as well. The evidence is the things that I'm going to provide in this video and any future episodes where I talk specifically about evidences of the Book of Mormon, or really any gospel principle. I'm not here to be your source of truth to tell you exactly how things are to behave, okay? Critical thinking is important in this process. It's important that you take the time to study, ponder, pray, think about it, go to the Lord about it, and ask for your own confirmation about what is right and what is true versus what may not necessarily be 100% true. I think the fundamental premise to all of this when studying is does this information bring you closer to Jesus Christ? Because fundamentally that is the premise of or is the goal that we're trying to achieve here. And that's the whole reason this channel exists. Really, the kind of goal or mission, if you will, of this channel is to teach people about Jesus Christ and about his second coming, and helping people be better prepared and aware of what's going on in the world around them, along with my fellow Christians, whether you're evangelical, whether you're Lutheran, Baptist, Protestant, Catholic, doesn't matter. I want us to work together to try and bring people into Jesus Christ. Okay. This video specifically, the last video, and I'll probably only do a couple of more videos on this particular topic, is simply because of the fact that the purpose of this channel is not to go in and to try and prove with any shadow of a doubt with archaeological evidences or other evidences that the Book of Mormon is true through external means. Somebody has to, or somebody will only come to a knowledge and an opinion that the Book of Mormon is true through personal testimony. Okay, so with that said, I'm not going to spend a lot going over all of these evidences. There are a lot of other channels. In fact, I'll drop links to them into the description of this video that can be additional resources if you're somebody that really wants to genuinely go and research these physical evidences. There's resources out there. There's people who are putting a lot more energy, a lot more effort into researching that, and they're doing a fantastic job. So I'll link to that because that's a better source for you to go, spend your time looking at rather than coming here. Okay. So with that said, coming back to this notion of an anachronism, what does that? It's kind of a unique word. What does it mean? Why do we use it? What role does it play when it comes to especially studying the Book of Mormon or any book of Scripture? Okay. Just starting here in the introduction, anachronism is something that appears in a text prior to the time that it could have been present. When a clear anachronism is found in any document claiming to be an original record or historical record, it immediately marks the document as false. The reason is obvious. No writer could know to include something that had not yet been invented or had not yet happened. Many have assumed that anachronisms in the Book of Mormon should similarly prove that it must be false, and it is a modern text only posing as an ancient one. That would be as true for the Book of Mormon as it is for any other text if the Book of Mormon claimed to be an ancient text, but it does not. It claims to be a translation of an ancient text, and that is a very important difference. All right, I want to pause here real quickly. So fundamentally, an anachronism is something that appears in written text claiming to be of ancient origin that doesn't apply to that time period. A clear example that somebody I saw when I was kind of researching this idea was a picture of Abraham Lincoln sitting at a table typing on a laptop. Laptops didn't exist in Abraham Lincoln's time, so obviously the reference of a laptop, that Abraham Lincoln was communicating with the military using laptops, that would be an anachronism, something that did not exist at his time, but in a photoshopped image, they're trying to show Abraham Lincoln working off of a laptop. Okay, that's an example of an anachronism, something that didn't exist that's being referenced in a historical document. And this is the fundamental premise that many have made in the comments of the previous two videos, that there was references in the Book of Mormon to animals, to metallurgy, to other technologies such as the wheel, meaning the chariot, that just predate or that technology comes after, or those items come after the time period of the peoples in the Book of Mormon. And so as a result, it therefore marks the Book of Mormon as false, simply because these things that are talked about in the Book of Mormon didn't exist until later. Okay. One of the, and I actually had this up just a minute ago, one of the terms that's been used is pre-Columbian. It's pre-Columbian. These things that are talked about existing pre-Columbian. Well, what does pre-Columbian mean? All right. In the history of the Americas, the pre-Columbian era spans from the original settlement of North and South America in the Upper Paleolithic period. Okay, Paleolithic is a time period back when the dinosaurs roamed, tens of thousands of years ago, through the European colonization, which began with Christopher Columbus' voyage of 1492. Okay, so when somebody makes a reference that something that is talked about is pre-Columbian, means it existed before Columbus came to the Americas. Anything post-Columbian or post, what's the right term? Discoverers? Not settlers, but discoverers. is a period of time after the pre-Columbian period, okay, or maybe modern time. I'm getting my terms wrong there. Don't harangue me on that. Again, I am not, I'm not a scholar in this matter. I'm what I would consider in a lot of ways kind of an average everyday person here. Okay, but I want to make sure that I understand this, and that those who are watching, when they start hearing some of these terms that they may not be familiar with, they also understand it. So we learn together, we grow together, and that we're also trying to speak somewhat of the same language. And so when we say certain words, we mean the same things. And that, by the way, is a little foreshadowing to some of the information. Is sometimes words are used to mean different things, okay? And so we'll come back to that concept. Okay, so coming back to the text, the fact that we have the Book of Mormon in translation doesn't mean that we can ignore the proposed anachronisms, but it does mean that we can and should carefully look to see if there are reasonable explanations for the proposed anachronisms. Now, in this video, I'm not going to read through all 11 pages. That's part of why I'm going to drop it in the links here for you. Go and read this on your own. A lot of good information, okay? Couple of things here. Evaluating anachronisms. Though complete explanations for some of these seeming anachronisms are currently elusive, a careful study of one verse in Alma may serve as a model to approach the study of all supposed anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. Okay, I'm reading this paragraph right here. Alma 18:9 states, quote, "And they said unto him, Behold, he is feeding thy horses. Now the king had commanded his servants previous to the time of the watering of their flocks that they should prepare his horses and chariots and conduct him forth to the land of Nephi. For there had been a great feast appointed to the land of Nephi by the father of Lamoni, who was the king over all the land." End quote. Okay, that was in Alma 18:9. The article goes on to say the controversy focuses on the use of horses and chariots. And same thing were called out in the comments in the video talking about the lands here in Missouri. So the controversy focuses on the use of horses and chariots in this verse. Of course, it is commonly believed that there were no horses in the New World prior to the arrival of the Spanish, and there had never been chariots pulled by those non-existent horses in ancient America. So how is one to account for references to horses and chariots in the Book of Mormon? Emerging scientific and archaeological evidence. LDS scholars have approached the issues of anachronism in multiple ways, and the verse with both horses and chariots provide a convenient way to describe the two major approaches. One explanation has been to search for reasons why the anachronisms wasn't actually anachronistic. For example, contrasted to the common knowledge that there were no horses in the Americas prior to the Spanish conquest, some scholars have argued that there were pre-Columbian horses. Okay, again, there's that term pre-Columbian. So that there were horses, some scholars argue that there were horses in the Americas, okay, prior to Columbus and the Spanish conquest. Now, one other thing I want to clarify here is that we're using the term Americas, and this is one of the other arguments about the Book of Mormon, is that we don't have the exact lands lined up. There are two theories of kind of geography of the Book of Mormon lands, one being Mesoamerica, the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico down through Central America. That's one area. The other is what's called the Heartland idea, which puts it up in the Midwest and Eastern regions of the United States of America. And two have very strong arguments to their reasoning. If that's a topic of review and you'd like me to talk about it, that might be one that I would consider talking about, because it is very fascinating to see the two schools of thought and the evidences that are proposed. But again, coming back to this article and this notion of archaeological evidences, that there are some that there were pre-Columbian horses, again, horses that existed in the Americas, north, south, central, prior to the arrival of Columbus. In one way, the common understanding about horses is both right and wrong. There certainly were pre-Columbian horses, and fossil evidence provides a reasonable developmental history of the New World horse. However, these readily acceptable horses appear to have become extinct in the Pleistocene period. Appealing to those horses does not support the Book of Mormon, because the Pleistocene ended long before the earliest parts of the Book of Mormon. However, researchers have found some anomalous remains that do appear to show that there were horses prior to the Spanish conquest, both closer to and after the Book of Mormon times. Wade E. Miller, a retired paleontologist from the Department of Geology at Brigham Young University, notes results from recent studies. Miller is quoted by saying, small scattered populations of horse and ass, especially in remote areas, probably survived in North America until shortly before they were reintroduced by the Spaniards. The carbon-14 dating involved was first investigated by Dr. Stephen E. Jones, former physics professor at Brigham Young University. I later worked with him on these, end quote. Miller notes that horse fossils found in North America have been dated between 5,890 BC to 1,120 BC. This research suggests caution in the firm declaration that there were no horses during the Book of Mormon times. Although not yet to the point that the evidence is widely accepted, the presence of the data introduces the possibility that the Book of Mormon horse might not be anachronistic after all. Others have also accepted that there would have been modern horses among the Nephites. LDS scholar Robert R. Bennett accepts that the word horse actually accurately represents the animal. Quote, in short, the Book of Mormon claims only that horses were known to some New World peoples before the time of Christ in certain limited regions of the New World. Thus, we need not conclude that from the text that horses were universally known in the Americas throughout pre-Columbian history. I want to also iterate a certain point here. There's some words when we're talking about these when we're talking about these evidences, we need to keep in mind. Ideas of possibility and probability, okay? Is it probable that some of these things could have existed? It's probable. We just may not have all the information, all of the data, all of the evidences to make it 100% confirmed, okay? It's possible. There are going to be these terms that we're going to use here. Is it possible? Is it probable? Okay. Again, going back to the example I gave in the last video about Joseph of Egypt, we don't have any hard archaeological evidences that Joseph of Egypt was a real person. It's probable because he served under the Pharaoh. Egypt existed at that time. We have evidences of Egypt existing at that time. We're starting to find evidences. In fact, I recently saw a documentary, was it National Geographic? It might have been National Geographic, where they had recently found silos in Egypt that were used to house grain. They actually found even remnants of the grain still in the silos. These silos have been destroyed and routed down to just pretty much the foundation, and they were buried. And they had to go, do their traditional archaeological digging and excavation to find these. That's newer evidence that's starting to come about. But we've known about the story of Joseph of Egypt in the Bible for thousands of years. So, it takes time. And that's another point that I want to bring out, okay? I don't know if they pointed out here. I was watching some videos from other archaeologists, and one of them pointed out that less than 1% of known sites have been actually excavated. Okay, so when we have known sites in North, Central, and South America that could be these that belong to ancient peoples, with what small percentage is known, less than 1% has actually been excavated and analyzed. So the argument that there's no archaeological evidence is a really bold statement, and it's to stand behind simply for the fact we just haven't done enough digging. We haven't done enough excavation. We just haven't. Now, if we had said, okay, we have found every possible site on the planet, okay, we now have 100% knowledge of sites, and of those sites, we've excavated 95 or 98 or 99% of them, and this evidence doesn't exist, that's a much stronger statement. The known sites make up a small percentage of the total space on the planet, especially in these regions, and of those sites that are known, less than 1% have actually been excavated. So we really know very, very little and have very little evidences that we can even begin to use as any sort of definitive statement that things just don't exist. We just haven't had the time and the effort to find it yet. All right. Although some of the suggested anachronisms in the Book of Mormon might be resolved by the discovery that they really weren't anachronistic at all, it is not an approach that can explain all of the anachronistic terms. Returning to our verse from Alma, so far there is no archaeological discovery that explains chariots. To date, attempts to show that chariots are not anachronistic have centered on discussions of the wheel. because a part of the argument against chariots has also been the presumed ignorance of the wheel and axle. LDS scholars have emphasized the evidence that the wheel and axle were known. Several small ancient ceremonial objects with wheels have been recovered. Although that shows there was pre-Columbian knowledge of the wheel and axle, it really doesn't tell us about chariots or any other larger wheeled vehicles, which are still unknown to exist during Book of Mormon times. This article goes on, or this document goes on to talk about word choice and translation. That plays a key role. Again, something I really encourage you guys to go and study and to review. Then talking about the shifting meaning of words. The case for the use of chariots in the Book of Mormon presents another issue in translation in addition to the one mentioned above. All languages evolve over time as vocabulary is added and the meanings associated with words shift. Modern readers see the words chariot and may mentally conjure images of Egyptian or Roman chariots, which were two-wheeled conveyances. Nevertheless, the word chariot has also been applied to four-wheeled conveyances, specifically the very wheeled figurines from Mesoamerica that some have used as support for pre-Columbian chariots. William Henry Holmes, an anthropologist and an archaeologist, recorded Desiree Charney obtained from an ancient cemetery in Tenanpanco, Mexico, a number of toy chariots of terracotta, presumably buried with the body of a child, some of which retained their wheels. Holmes had no problem using the same word that Charney had used in his original text. Holmes and Charney wrote that they were chariots in Mesoamerica. They did not mean old world war chariots. The use of chariots in the Book of Mormon translation need not either. Sometimes the translation anachronism might partially depend on changes in English meanings that make it appear that something was made anachronistic than it was at the time that Joseph translated the Book of Mormon. So as I kept reading through here, again, a lot of great information, more than I feel like is appropriate to go through in this video. This is not meant to be a word-for-word read and review of this article or this document, but it landed as a great starting point, especially with trying to understand the concept of anachronism. When I was going through here, they had this section about additional resources, and I found this one to be of particular interest. This article about animals in the Book of Mormon, the challenges and perspectives. Now note that this URL is actually old. I tried looking at it and it didn't come, it errored out, meaning the old URL, this URL doesn't work. So I had to go and find the interpreter, the Mormon interpreter is what it's known. And the reason for it is because they've changed names and is now known as the Interpreter Foundation. And so this is it. I went in and was able to find the article again, the challenges and perspectives to animals in the Book of Mormon. Again, another great read. I will drop a link to this in the description of this video. Please go through and read it. It's very extensive. It's even longer, from what I can tell, than the 11-page article on anachronisms. But they also, again, provide some very good perspective to think about when looking at and evaluating the animals talked about in the Book of Mormon. Hey, brothers and sisters, I got to jump in here. Sorry for the abrupt change in setup. While I was recording this next piece, for whatever reason, the audio in my headset cut out, and I lost several minutes of this next piece of information. So I'm inserting myself now and re-recording this small segment that, for whatever reason, the audio cut out, and then I will jump back to the original recording. So what I was just about to talk about was here in the Interpreter Foundation. Let me bring this up. There's this reference, or they're calling out biblical names, and the fact that while one of the criticisms of the Book of Mormon, one of the quote-unquote anachronisms within the Book of Mormon is reference to animals that we don't have any archaeological evidences towards, or for their existence, especially for the time period. One of the big arguments is that the animals that are referenced in the Book of Mormon, what in their mind makes it an anachronism is that the fact that the existence of these animals being in the Americas pre-Columbian time. And if you remember from the definition of pre-Columbian, meaning anything that takes place pretty much from the Ice Age to the time that Columbus landed in the Americas. And so that window of time, a lot of the criticism is that, well, we don't have evidences that animals or these specific species of animals existed in the Americas. And so therefore it's false, and that's what makes the Book of Mormon false. And this is something I want to point out, that again, going back to my previous episode, is having archaeological evidences shouldn't be the fundamental premise for one's opinion or judgment on whether or not the Book of Mormon is true. The Book of Mormon, a belief in a testimony of the Book of Mormon should be spiritually based 100%. Any physical testimonies or physical evidences that support its existence, that support its accuracy, that's just gravy. That's just icing on the cake, right? So one of the things that I found interesting is from the Interpreter Foundation, they point out that there's examples in the Bible where we have references to creatures that we also don't have archaeological evidences. This is another example where the Bible is also just like the Book of Mormon, is we don't have evidences of every single thing that was talked about in the Bible. And so, one of the things I guess I want to kind of say back to the critics is going, listen, if you're going to use the argument that we don't have archaeological evidences to support the existence of in this case, animals, that's what this episode's focusing on, is animals, and therefore makes the scriptures false, well, then we got to play by the same rules and the same definition and argument for the Bible, because we also have evidences of or uses or references to animals in the Bible that we don't have archaeological evidences existed. So if that's the justification for making the Book of Mormon false, then we've got to apply that same justification to the Bible. I'm just saying, if we're going to play the game, we got to play the game evenly and fairly. The rules apply here; they have to apply over here. Now, I am not by any means saying that I think that the Bible is false or wrong. I still have a firm testimony and belief in the Bible, and that it plays an important role in our understanding and teaching and learning of Jesus Christ. Okay. I just want to call out that we can't play by two separate rules when we're trying to evaluate the legitimacy of religious text, of scriptural text that our Heavenly Father has gone through a lot of effort to make available to us for our benefit. So with that in mind, and sorry, my device is buzzing. Let me make sure, do not disturb. There we go. So I want to take a look at this example. So biblical animals. In the Book of Mormon, there's references, I was reading segments when I shouldn't have. In considering the types of animals given in the Book of Mormon, it might be well to mention references from the Bible. Are there more listed in the former scripture or in the latter? The Bible has by far the most listed animals. So the Bible has 130 different types of animals listed. The Book of Mormon only has 14. What's interesting about the animals referenced in the Book of Mormon compared to those in the Bible is the Book of Mormon really only calls out by name or by species those certain types of animals that were domesticated for the purpose of the civilization. They use more generic terms like beasts of the forest, birds of the sky, right? They're more generic. They don't call out, well, there was blue jays and robins and penguins and cranes and things of that nature. They, for whatever reason, they just keep it very broad and generic when they're talking about any type of animal that hasn't been used for the domesticated use and benefit of the people. So the other thing now, kind of coming back then to the Bible, when we look at how animals are referenced in the Bible, there's this great variety that's talked about, including insects and fish and things of that nature, which is cool to see. But I found this kind of interesting that they point out here in the Interpreter Foundation is that while there's some similarities, one of the interesting differences is the fact that the elephant is mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but it's nowhere in the Bible. And I'll agree, I find that very interesting because when we think about geography, where does the Bible primarily take place? It takes place in Jerusalem, in that region, and in Eastern Europe. And so those regions, I mean, at one point in time, even the Savior talks about his time in Egypt. We actually also have the children of Egypt, so which is in the north corner of Africa. So yet we have no references to elephants when the Bible lands have the African continent to the southwest, and you have the Indian and Asian region of the world directly to the east. And yet, not once is the elephant directly referenced. Now, they do point out the fact that the elephant is kind of alluded to simply when we talk about or look at King Solomon. His throne was made out of ivory. And so, that's interesting because where does ivory come from? Ivory comes from one place only, and that is from the tusks of elephants. So this is the closest the Bible gets to talking about the existence of elephants. But if we had no idea that that elephants existed and that ivory came from the tusks of elephants because we didn't have them today,
just imagine how confused we'd be. Like, what is ivory? What does it look like? What color is it? What is it a soft? I mean, obviously, if a throne is made out of it, it's got to be hard. It's got to be tough. So is it like stone? What is it? And that's a very interesting idea to kind of think about here. So coming back to their sentiment in the Interpreter Foundation, they say caution must be taken when identifying animals in either of the two books. Some of the names given in both represent animals for which we cannot be sure of their true nature. A few names in the Bible are the behemoth, the cheroglus, unicorn, and pygarg. And I'll tell you, the only one that I'm familiar with is the unicorn. And what's interesting is when I was looking it up, there are 6 different references to a unicorn in the Bible. And yet, what's interesting is, guess what? We don't have archaeological evidence that shows the physical existence of a unicorn. We don't have it. We have it in writing in the Bible. We have it in other writings, and we have it pictorially. There's a lot of artwork over the centuries where unicorns are referenced, but we don't have any physical evidence. So again, if we're playing the game that you have to have physical evidence to justify or validate the existence of something, and in this case, animals, and we're talking more specifically of a unicorn, well, then we've got to say, and since a lot of people say that unicorns are mythical, well, then doesn't that make the Bible mythical? See how we're caught in this weird conundrum, and this is why we have to be very cautious and careful of hanging our hat of certainty and validity on the fact that we have physical evidence to pair with with the scriptural references. Behemoth. This was found in Job chapter 40, verse 15. It says, quote, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox." So the closest thing that we know about the behemoth animal, it was an herbivore, ate grass like an ox. How much bigger than an ox? We have no idea. Did it have horns? Did it have antlers? Did it have, long tail, short tail, eating tail? We have no idea. The other ones that it referenced here was the Cheroglus. Now, this one was interesting because I initially, again, started searching in the Bible for it. I used both the Scripture Citation Index, and when I searched for Cheroglus, it says no documents match. It couldn't find any scriptural reference in the King James Version, and that's what I want to point out. In the King James Version, the reference of the Cheroglus does not exist. I found that very interesting. I also used Blue Letter Bible to search, and I got the same thing. There's no concordance results for Cheroglus in the King James Version. So I had to go do some digging to figure out where this even came from because, did the Interpreter Foundation slip in a made-up animal? I don't know. And so I did a little more digging, and here's what I found. That there's a translation version of the Bible known as the Rems, the Douay Rems Bible. It's a translation of the Bible from the Latin Vulgate into English. It was the first officially authorized Catholic Bible translated into English and has formed the basis for some later Roman Catholic Bibles in English. It includes the 7 deuterocanonical books, also known as the Apocrypha. And in the RHE version of the Bible, Leviticus chapter 11, verse 5, that's where we see the reference to Cheroglus. Again, we're talking about translation here. Why did this Latin Vulgate into English use the reference of Cheroglus? Because if we look at what the King James Version does, where did I say this was? Leviticus? Leviticus chapter 11, verse 5. They change out the use of Cheroglus with the word coney. And what's interesting is this coney, when I looked this animal up, was, I believe, kind of something like similar to a rabbit, a Middle Eastern rabbit. So now the question comes down to, is this Cheroglus a rabbit and it's just a different name? I don't know. Or did they just, and I'll get to this point here in just a second, but why did they switch it out in the King James Version to the coney? Something to think about. The last one pointing out here is the pygarg. And did I not put that one in here? There were several references to the pygarg. Apparently I didn't make note of that in here. But I want to come back to this notion of why the name changed, especially from the Douay Reams Bible versus what we see in the King James Version. The Interpreter Foundation made this sentiment here. It says, commonly people will name an unidentified animal in a newly settled region after a similar looking animal with which they are familiar. Okay, we see this many times in many histories, not just specific to animals. There's many times where civilizations or have been exposed to something for the very first time that they don't know how to describe it. And so, what does their natural tendency do? Try to fall back to what they know and to try and draw upon similarities to help illustrate. Because what's going to happen is they're going to now tell people they know. They're either going to tell their family, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to write back home to where they came from to say, hey, we found this thing. The closest we can equate it to is a rabbit, but it's not the same thing. But we're going to just use this term because that's the closest thing we can come up with at this time. Because a lot of these individuals who come across these new species, they're not there as scientists on an exploration to try and find and discover and catalog and name. That wasn't their purpose, and that's not their interest. They just, when they reference it, they're going to use something that's familiar to them. Uh, it says, going back to the Interpreter Foundation, this happened on many occasions when Europeans colonized on foreign lands. For example, the true buffalo is an old world bovide whose name was applied to the American bison. And the American pronghorns are commonly called antelopes as they resemble old world animals. North American moose, known as an elk in Europe. Even in the same language, a given animal can have various names. You have mountain lion, cougar, puma, mountain cat, catamount, etc. All of this serves to point out the need for caution in identifying animals in Scripture. I just kind of want to illustrate this point here is that when Joseph Smith was going through and doing translation, he came across words and references to animals he probably had no way to relate or connect it to. There are a couple of animals that still exist in their original name or name for that animal, even though Joseph Smith was translating it. He didn't have any context as to what was that animal was similar to. So when we talk about this notion of elephants, what is Joseph doing is he's taking a creature that he's unfamiliar with and equates it to the next closest thing that he is familiar with. And so, that's kind of where we get this notion of the reference of certain animals, and the same thing with certain technologies. And we'll talk about this again to a point when we talk about the technologies and the use of metal and why that is the case. So I just want to kind of wrap this up because this is the part that was cut out or was dropped out of the original audio. So with that said, I'm going to catch you back up in the original recording. Thanks.
Sorry, I got cut off. The audio in my headphones dropped. So what I was pointing out is the fact that we don't know the nuances that Joseph Smith went through when translating from the gold plates to essentially in English. It was an ancient variation of Hebrew, of Reformed Egyptian, translated into English. We don't know, and in part, Joseph didn't take any notes. He didn't have any scratch papers. He didn't have any, mind maps showing kind of how this was all going to form together. He was simply just reading straight through from where he left off. He kept it all in his head. That's just phenomenal. Which plays into kind of my point in the last episode about the origins of the Book of Mormon in and of itself. But I don't want to get back onto that tangent. If you haven't seen that episode, go back and watch that one. But the point being here is that we use this as an example, is that when the Bible in 1744 was translated into the language to the Greenlandic language, those that were spoken by people in Greenland, the term sheep, they didn't have any idea or concept of sheep, let alone how they were used in society. So when he translated, he used a different animal to help illustrate and represent a point. Same thing we need to keep in mind when we're talking about the Book of Mormon and the animals referenced in the Book of Mormon. This article goes on to talking about the domestication of animals and the fact that only a few animals were actually specifically called out and used and referenced as being domesticated for the purpose of the people. A lot of good reading in here. And I want to encourage you to read this and to consider what I'm talking about. I want to wrap up with kind of one more concept or idea to keep in mind here, and that is that the names that are used in the Book of Mormon may not necessarily be the names that were actually used by the people themselves. That's what just was translated from one name into another, so we would have some sort of context and understanding of to what it might mean, that when we read we know what's going on, right? Just how much more confusing would the scriptures be if none of those things got put into a version we could understand? Okay, and that's, I think, an important concept to keep in the back of the mind here. The other thing that plays into mind is that where names come from. A lot of times the names are applied by those who did the discovery. And I'll give an example. Okay, this is archeology.org. This is in their archives. There's an article about a group of people known as the Hopewell Native Americans. The reason I bring this particular article up is because this group is part of the Heartland idea of the Book of Mormon people. Those that believe or follow the Heartland ideology of the Book of Mormon people, they tie them very closely to the Hopewells. And it's important to understand, well, who are the Hopewells? I've never heard of the Hopewells when talking about Native Americans or American Indians. I've heard of the Sioux and the Paiute and the Cherokee and the Arapaho, but Hopewell, I've never really heard of the Hopewell. Who are the Hopewell? Well, it's important to understand that the Hopewell, I'm actually just going to read it out of the article. The Hopewell culture flourished in Ohio. I used to live in Ohio. I've seen some of these areas in person. They're amazing. They're worth seeing if you're ever in Ohio to go check them out. So they flourished in Ohio and other parts of eastern North America during the Middle Woodland period, possibly as early as 100 BC. We do not know what these people might have called themselves. There we go. We don't know what they called themselves. We call them the Hopewell. And why do we call them the Hopewell? The name we use comes from Mordecai Hopewell, a Chillicothe landowner on whose property mounds were excavated in the 1800s. So Hopewell is not the accurate name for this group of people. We simply call them Hopewell because of the person that owned the land at the time where it was discovered and archaeological excavation was taking place. That's it. We simply are giving a credit to the quote to the discoverer, which happens in all facets of science and search. Okay, there are many things that are named after its inventor or discoverer. Hubble telescope, named after the scientist. We got to keep also that in mind when we look at some of these terms in the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to wrap up here simply for the fact is that there's a lot of research out there, and those that make the blanket statements is there's no evidence. I'm showing you two separate resources already to go look that there are evidences of certain animals. We just don't have all the discoveries. They do actually point out in here, and I want to illustrate this point real quickly, extinction of animals. I do want to end up with this point here, okay? Because again, we don't have the bones to show that these animals existed. Extinction of animals. It seems prudent to discuss extinction in this article as it relates to some of the Book of Mormon animals. Extinction is a topic that has been extensively dealt with in the scientific literature. Of specific interest here are the widespread extinctions that occurred at the close of the Pleistocene or Ice Age epoch, especially throughout North America. The mammoth, aka the elephant, or what the Book of Mormon refers to as the elephant, horse, and ass are animals listed in the Book of Mormon that presumably became extinct in North America at the close of the Pleistocene about 10,000 years ago. Curloms and Cumoms mentioned in the Book of Ether probably represent extinct animals too. This seems likely as Joseph Smith apparently wasn't able to relate them with any living animal. Okay, so why did Joseph use the term elephant, Curloms, and Cumoms? Well, because when he came across those words and however they were described, he couldn't think of any modern living animal that he knew of that he could reference for a point of comparison to that creature. So the problem is we don't know if Curloms and Cumoms are mammals. We don't know if they're birds, if they're fish. We don't know what they are. And that stems from the fact that when being translated, Joseph didn't have something to compare it to or to equivalent it to. He seems to have simply transliterated the words on the gold plates from which he was translating. While figures will vary among researchers, probably the total number of plant and animal species living today is no more than 1% of all those that have ever lived on Earth. That's mind-blowing. What the species that live today is no more than 1% of total animal types that have historically lived on Earth. That's mind-blowing. Again, we're dealing with very small percentages. This means that about 99% of all life that ever lived on Earth is now extinct. Sometimes extinctions will affect a single species, but more often they affect many because of interconnections of life forms. In the history of the Earth, there have been times of mass extinction in a short period of time. Dinosaurs have often been used as a classic example of this. It should be realized that extinctions are a natural process in the history of the Earth. As conditions are ever changing on Earth, life forms are forced to adapt or else die out. i.e. become extinct. The dying out of the mammoth, horse, and ass in North America presents only a small part of the mass extinction that occurred at the end of the Pleistocene. This particular extinction event affected mostly large mammals. It is this extinction which is most relevant to the present article. What causes organisms to become extinct? Basically, it is a change in the environment, usually sudden in the geological sense, to which organisms cannot adjust. All right, keep going. Talking about the fact that the mammoth or the elephant, horse, and ass were supposed to have been extinct in North America during the Book of Mormon has caused many to doubt, if not disbelieve, the book's authenticity and divine origin. It is therefore vital to have a clear understanding of when these animals actually became extinct on this continent. And they provide resources and evidences. If we scroll all the way down to this article, they provide all their sources to the claims that are in this article. So anybody that wants to challenge them, read up on them, going, where on earth did you come up with that information? All right down here are all their evidences or all their sources that they use in their articles. So it's important to understand and think about is that 99% of animals have become extinct. And guess what? We don't have bones. We don't have fossils. We don't have evidences that they existed. Why? Most of the time they just don't survive decomposition. Various reasons, okay? They also pointed out, and I can't remember where in this article, so you'll have to go back and find it, but in here they also, one of the points they pointed out is that going, okay, so if you've got a land mass of this big, and we go in and we only excavate this portion and we don't find bones, well, it doesn't mean that the bones of that creature didn't exist. It just means that for whatever reason, we excavated this area, the bones may live out in this region and we never got to it, therefore we never found it. Therefore, we don't have the evidence that supports their existence, okay? So with that, I just want to wrap up. I want to thank again for the comments. Keep them coming. I love having you guys comment and to share this information. It provides a lot of good information to research and to study. I've provided two sources for you to start to study if you're really adamant about wanting to know and understand the physical and archaeological evidences, specifically to animals. Here's two sources to get started and to start reading through. With that in mind, any additional commentary, again, please put it down in the comments. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe. It helps us grow, continue to do more research. Feel free to follow us on Instagram. We've got our blog, which has transcripts from previous episodes on there. They're not all on there right now, but I've got the first 4 of them are on there. And if you have something really lengthy or some like other sources or research you want to share, my email down below, please send me an email. And I'll take a look at it. So again, I just want to say thank you so much for coming to this episode. Stay tuned for next time, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.